Hello, and welcome to this webinar on PhD scholarships for the Hull Center for Sustainability and Olympic Legacy. We are here today with the three principal supervisors for each of the three very exciting PhDs we have under this cluster, Andrew, David, and Stephen, as well as Kirsty from the Doctoral College, who will have answers to all of your questions on the administrative side of things. I am Dr. Agata Motskute, among my other roles of lecturing in renewable energy and knowledge exchange fellow in offshore wind. I am the director of this center, Hull Center for Sustainability and Olympic Legacy. We will hear from the project leads, a short introduction to each of the three projects. We will have significant amount of time for questions at the end. So make sure you come up with plenty of questions. Make sure you drop them into the questions box. You can do that as we go, but we will first hear the three presentations from each of the project supervisors, and only then we'll address the questions. But keep them coming in the questions box as we go. So in the next slide, I would like to introduce the center as a whole to begin with, to give a little bit of background. So the Hull Center for Sustainability and Olympic Legacy is an Olympic Studies and Research Center recognized by the International Olympic Committee's Olympic Studies Center. It has been established, I wanted to say this year, but it has been 2022. We're already in the new year. So it's quite recent, but it provides an umbrella for all of the amazing work we do at the University of Hull that's relevant to the Olympics. We are an official partner for Team GB, so we have done quite a few projects with that. Some of the completed projects include one Team GB heritage project led by one of the supervisors on these projects that explored the heritage of Team GB. We did Tokyo 2020 360 video project, which provided a VR set for athletes before they go on to the Tokyo Olympics. Because of the pandemic, they could familiarize themselves with their training venues. Another project that we did was Project Footprint, where we assessed Team GB's organizational carbon footprint so that they could sign up for Sports for Climate Action Race to Zero. And another very important thing I think I should mention to you all is that you would not be alone in this cluster on the Olympics related research, because we already have an existing cluster of 3 Team GB specific PhDs who have started last September. So one of them is Green to Gold, more on the community engagement into sports through green areas. Another is Race to Zero, on the Olympic system moving towards net zero, and another is Life Beyond Sport, which explores the well-being of athletes as they retire after their very extremely exciting sports careers. So this is a little bit of a background on the Hull Center for Sustainability and Olympic Legacy. But now in the next slide, I have the summary of the 3 projects that you can apply for and that we're gonna hear from all the supervisors for. They're quite diverse. And yeah, hopefully you have one in mind that you want to apply for. The introductions to the projects are going to be given by the project supervisors. And just another reminder, please drop plenty of questions in the questions box. If any of your questions relate specifically to a specific project, you could indicate that to make sure that the right person answers it. If it's more generic, just drop it into the questions box. Some of the questions are going to be answered already typed up in the chat, so look out for some answers there, or we will pick them up after the presentations from the project supervisors. So without any further ado, I would like to hand over to Andrew Simpson to introduce the first PhD project.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction and for everyone that's listening. So I'm going to talk to you about a PhD fellowship opportunity that we've got that's exploring environmental sustainability in the respiratory care of athletes. Just move on to the first slide. So I imagine the audience here is fairly diverse given the range of topics and fellowships that are on offer. So it may surprise some of you at least to hear that athletes aren't always the perfect specimens of health that we picture them to be, and athletes, like the rest of us, are prone to respiratory conditions, particularly asthma and exercise-induced bronchoconstriction, which is just a phenotype of asthma whereby exercise is the trigger for an asthma attack. And there's actually now very convincing evidence that athletes and those individuals that participate in high levels of exercise are at an increased risk of asthma or exercise-induced bronchoconstriction than the general population. And these data are a little old now, but stemming from when athletes were required to submit what we call therapeutic use exemption forms prior to Olympic Games, it is estimated that around 8% of all athletes suffer from asthma or exercise-induced bronchoconstriction. This increases to 20% of Team GB athletes, perhaps reflecting their increased screening program that Team GB adhere to. And then it increases yet again in certain disciplines. So those endurance-based disciplines or aquatic-based disciplines are at an increased rate yet again. So the treatment pathway for an athlete with asthma is the same as the general population. It stems around two key inhalers. There's the inhaled corticosteroids, often referred to as the controller inhaler, which tackles the inflammation within the airways, and then the bronchodilators, which causes that instant relief. And these drugs are often delivered through what we call a pressure-metered dose inhaler. So if I asked you to picture an inhaler, it's probably what you would picture, and it's the one on the left-hand side if you're struggling to picture any inhaler at all. And these drugs are brilliant. It's one of the few drugs that's delivered to exactly where it's needed. You press the top of the inhaler, the drug's delivered and breathed directly into your airways, and it provides the drug to where it's needed. The problem with these drugs or these inhalers is that the drug's delivered on the back of what we call hydrofluorocarbon propellant. And these hydrofluorocarbon propellants have a very high global warming potential. So the staggering fact here is that just one inhaler, so 200 doses of an inhaler, is estimated to be the equivalent of a 290-kilometer car journey. And the good thing about this is there are alternative treatments, and these exist in the form of dry powder inhalers, which is the one on the right-hand side. And to give that the same context, the carbon dioxide equivalent would just be a 6-kilometer car journey. If you just skip to the next slide for me. So given the high prevalence of asthma and EIB in athletes and the high carbon footprint of the common asthma treatment, we've got three aims of this project. Firstly, it's to quantify the carbon footprint related to the respiratory care of athletes. So we envisage some sort of survey to determine medication prescription usage, knowledge of environmental impact, and then barriers facilitators to changing medication. Then some sort of efficacy study that can determine whether dry powder inhalers are as effective as these pressured metered dose inhalers for improving asthma control or inhibiting exercise-induced bronchoconstriction. And this could be a combination of systematic reviews, meta-analysis, or hopefully some experimental data in there as well. And finally, so we can roll this out a little bit further, we envisage the creation of some sort of educational program aimed at athletes, support staff, exercise medicine practitioners about the environmental impact and proposing ways, pragmatic ways to implement change over to these perhaps more sustainable treatments. You on to the last slide for me. So this project, you'll be in safe hands. You've heard it enough from myself, but we've also got Dr. Michael Crooks, who's a senior lecturer in respiratory medicine. Dr. Crooks is also the principal investigator on a project called Carbon, which is trying to do a very similar thing, but in patient populations, so in patients that suffer asthma and COPD. And they've already achieved excellent things in their savings in greenhouse gas emissions from swapping people over in the region from pressure meter dose inhalers to dry powder inhalers. And again, we've heard from Agota, who's also on the supervisory team and is the director for this centre. Both myself and Agota are available to answer questions at the end, and Dr. Crooks sent his apologies. He couldn't make it, he's busy in clinic tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Very exciting presentation. I hope the attendees have a lot of questions. Make sure you drop them into the questions box and we will pick them all up at the end. There's no such thing as a silly question. Drop them all in about this project, about another project, about PhD in general, anything. Go for it. Next on, we have Dr. David Eldridge presenting the second of the PhDs.
Hi. Yeah, so if we can start with the first slide, please, Claire. Right, so this is a very different scholarship. As you said, we're very diverse for free, but we're engaging with here. This is looking to tackle the subject of Olympic legacy from a very social perspective. There's been such a remarkable rise in visibility of LGBTQ athletes at the Olympics, from just 23 at the London Games to 186 in Tokyo. That those 186 athletes is calculated would have finished 7th in the medal tables if they worked collectively. Our key thinking then behind this project is that the impact of this visibility on LGBTQ participation in sports has the potential to be a vital new element of the Olympic legacy, and athletes themselves certainly hope that their openness and achievements will inspire. Canadian swimmer, for example, Marcus Formay, put it by saying, "I hope that by competing at the Games as my most authentic self, I can show the LGBT community that we do belong and that we can achieve anything we put our minds to." And his hope seems supported by a European study published in 2019, which showed that 70% of LGBTQ respondents regarded famous sports stars coming out as being the most important factor of all in tackling homophobic or transphobic discrimination in sports. Against that, though, we've got decades of academic research about LGBTQ engagement with sports, which reaches back to the 1970s and continually documents how gay, lesbian, bi, trans youth have avoided sports due to discrimination, due to experiences or perceptions of an unwelcoming or intimidating culture in sports. And studies have repeatedly emphasised the need for sports cultures to change, to be more inclusive. The International Olympic Committee itself has acknowledged that too. A 2016 statement affirmed that LGBTQ people needed special protection in sports and blamed continued discrimination on the lack of effective leadership by major international and national sports organisations. And indeed, after a backlash that came against the staging of the Winter Olympics in Sochi in Russia, the International Olympic Committee itself amended the Olympic Charter to include sexual orientation in its non-discrimination principles. If we can move to the next slide, please. So of the objectives, one key objective of this scholarship then is to engage with the narratives of this unofficial team, LGBTQ, the athletes themselves, to determine whether the kind of actions by the IOC, such as that change to its charter, had any effect on the decision to come out, and also to think about how that then intersects with their experiences of the bodies which govern their particular disciplines, like FINA's recent policies regarding trans women, which have been seen as very negative. Through that, we hope we can better assess how policies and official positions, both positively or negatively, contribute to this surge in visibility that we've seen. And then the key purpose beyond that is to assess the impact of that visibility on LGBTQ youth. How conscious are they of the Olympic movement's relationship to discrimination? Crucially, do the ambitions of our athletes themselves to inspire people by their openness actually have a genuine impact on the attitudes and specifically the participation in sports of young people? So that's really what we want you to consider, and there's many ways you could approach this question of evaluating impact. There's never going to be a kind of straight line of cause and effect. Obviously, you're not going to be able to speak for all LGBTQ young people around the world, or indeed all 186 of the out Olympians. So what we're looking to see in the kind of personal statement is kind of some consideration of the methodologies, the possible angles you could take, and maybe what your particular focus would be. But what we're looking for you to do at this stage is explain how you'd go about designing a kind of workable research project within this remit, and how your skills, how your scholarly experience that you've developed, how that would serve you in developing and delivering that kind of project. And that's what I want to see evidence of in any personal statement. And of course, if you're shortlisted, want to see that at the interview and build on that at the interview stage as well. So if we can move to the final slide. So as you can see from this slide, the successful candidate in developing this is going to benefit from a trio of supervisors as well. That includes myself with experience in working on research projects and lived experience of engaging with LGBTQ sports at a grassroots level here in Hull, alongside Dr. Catherine Baker, who's currently researching into LGBT equality in cultural mega events such as Hull City of Culture programmes and the Eurovision Song Contest, as well as the Olympics. And then John Toner, who brings in sports science expertise to the project. He's a lecturer in sports coaching and performance, is already involved in these Team GB PhDs, who Agatha's mentioned, and he's also Deputy Director of this research. So, as Andrew said, you'll be in safe hands and very interdisciplinary hands working on this project. So, thank you.
Thank you, David. Another reminder for the audience, drop questions in the questions box. You now have 2 presentations on 2 very exciting projects to put your questions on, any generic questions. And now we're on to the 3rd project presented by Dr. Stephen Forrest.
Well, thank you there, Agota. Hello, everybody. My name's Dr. Stephen Forrest. I'm a lecturer in flood resilience and sustainable transformations. I'm an environmental social scientist, and I'm based at the Energy and Environment Institute at the University of Hull. Next slide, please. Now, what I'd like to tell you about is this really exciting project that we've got going called Preparing for a Climate Resilient and Net Zero Olympics. And the project's really going to be investigating social and environmental sustainability in host cities, Olympic host cities. Now, I'm sure you're aware or you're familiar, you've heard of the climate emergency. Climate change is happening. We're seeing concerted efforts to try and reduce our emissions, while also thinking about how we can prepare for climate change and the impacts from climate change, including extreme weather events. What we're seeing is a shift in our thinking, and we're seeing a lot of big policy decisions and initiatives at a global level. For example, the UN's race to resilience and race to zero, one of which is focusing on climate resilience, one of which is focusing on net zero targets. And the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, is very engaged in these conversations. They are trying to understand climate emergency and also the impacts that the Olympics can have on them. However, what we're seeing is the race to resilience and the race to zero, these ideas of climate resilience and reducing carbon emissions being treated very separately. They are often seen as 2 individual policy targets, 2 individual aims, and they have people, practitioners, perhaps focusing on one and missing out the other one. And in this case, not talking to each other. So we're missing out a lot of opportunities to look for synergies in policy and have policy alignment to see the benefits of both. And this is really important. We're focusing on the Olympic Games because it's a sporting and cultural mega event. And if we can work it here in these Olympic host cities, then we can hopefully apply this knowledge to other cultural and sporting events. Next slide, please. So what we propose is having a case study approach looking at Los Angeles 2028. Now, LA will be hosting the Olympics in 2028, and they're already thinking about net zero and climate resilience. So they've already got some initiatives there. What we propose is that the PhD student, the successful one, whoever you may be in the room at the moment in the webinar, you'll start by analysing the public-private governance of climate impacts and look at the city's carbon footprint. So some of this information already exists and you'd be synthesising it, but you might also need to do some interviews and some policy document analysis. Then would propose that you investigate the potential climate impacts on residents and the city's functioning, the visiting athletes, and the Olympic Village and the venues used. Finally, we'd hope that you'll be able to explore how to bridge this gap, providing recommendations for policymakers, but also for Los Angeles 2028. This is a very interdisciplinary approach. You'll be using a different variety of methods, for example, both qualitative and quantitative, hopefully in a mixed methods research approach, using interviews, carbon footprinting following a greenhouse gas protocol, policy document analysis, and also circular economy life cycle assessment. Now that's quite a lot of different skills needed there for data collection. Don't worry if you don't have them all. During the PhD journey, you can develop them. There'll be opportunities to follow courses, to bridge maybe the gaps that you have in your knowledge of methods, but also to develop your methods further. And ideally, you'll be able to provide recommendations, not only having your dissertation, which contributes to the academic literature and the academic knowledge that already exists, but you'll also be able to make policy recommendations for future Olympic host cities and for future large-scale sports and cultural mega events in the UK and further afield. Next slide, please. So on this last slide, it's really the supervisors. You've met me, I'm a lecturer in flood resilience. I have expertise in climate resilience, specifically with flooding, extreme amounts of water in the wrong place at the wrong time, but also socio-spatial planning and urban governance. My speciality might be more on urban planning and the environmental social sciences. We also have Dr. Agota Moshkuta, who you've already met before. She's on the call as well. She's a lecturer in renewable energy, and her expertise for this project will be focusing on net zero, carbon emissions modelling, and carbon footprinting and abatement measures. She'll also be able to bring some of her expertise and her contacts from her work on the Olympics as a topic. And finally, but last but not least, we have Professor Andy Jonas. He's a professor of human geography, really nice guy. He's got expertise in sustainability, the circular economy in cities, and the geopolitics of city regionalism. He also has extensive networks in the LA region, and we've already been in contact with some people at UCLA who are working on topics linked to this and sustainability, and they're also very interested in getting involved. So what I want to like to say is there's a lot of expertise that can help you and support you to help you on the PhD journey. And with that, I'll pass back to Agota.
Thank you, Stephen. Very lovely and concise and exciting introductions to all three projects. Attendees, please keep your questions flowing through the questions box. Let's go to the next slide, which literally just says Q&A, because that's where we are now. We have more than half an hour to go through any of the questions that you type in. So keep them coming to any specific project, to PhD in general, about Hull, anything you want to know. The first question that we have received has been from Lauren. It says, hello, I was wondering if there was any criteria for being able to access this PhD, specifically for Team LGBTQ+. So I would like to address this question to David from Navy and Kirsty. I would like you both to answer this question, and then we can expand it into what would an ideal candidate look like for each of the PhDs. So Andrew and Stephen, I'm going to come to you afterwards. But to answer this question from Lauren, Kirsty, would you like to cover any generic requirements to access PhDs in general first?
Yeah, hello everybody, and thanks, Agota. So the eligibility requirements for each of the projects will be on the website, so take a look at the web page, as well as the generic Hull University entry requirements. There might be some specific things relating to the project, so a certain background that people, so the subjects that you might have studied previously. So do have a look at the entry requirements. Where it would say specifically, say you must have a 2-1 undergraduate, that's normally not negotiable, but the type of subjects that you've studied previously, it's worth getting in touch with supervisors, just because you may well have some experience and that is really, really valuable to those PhD subjects. So I would certainly reach out and check with us, but the entry requirements are on the website, so take a look at the individual project pages.
Thank you, Kirsty. David, would you like to add anything on?
Yeah, obviously ours is a very interdisciplinary project anyway, and as I said before, there are many different ways that this could be approached in terms of it. Largely we're looking in terms of conceptualizing a project at skill sets that are going to involve having experience with interviewing and qualitative analysis and interpretation of evidence produced from those kind of interviews. But that can be generated from all sorts of different subject areas, where people have got degrees in media and journalism, or interpretation of sources in history and cultural studies would be relevant. Obviously, anyone with subject areas relating to gender and sexuality could be particularly effective at this, because we do want to be thinking about kind of the sensitivities and the ability of the candidate to be able to build relationships with the LGBT communities that they will be interviewing, working with, as well as the LGBTQ athletes themselves. So it's kind of suitable that will be something that we'll be taking into consideration and talking about with potential applicants. But yeah, sports science, sports psychology, and psychology in general also lends itself to this. If we're talking about the psychological impact that role models can have on individuals, which is going to be quite fundamental to the work that the candidate will be doing, then psychology lends itself well to that as well. But yeah, very broad. That's why I said in my introduction to this, what I'd want to see in the personal statement is not so much you sort of saying what the subject is that you're doing, but how you can relate that subject and the skills that you develop from that subject and your practices to the kind of model that you see this PhD following. We're open to all sorts of different approaches to the delivery and the execution of that particular research. So Stephen's discussion there about the case study of Los Angeles, again, we might be asking, a student might want to be thinking about which particular communities of LGBTQ youth that they will be interviewing, which nation, whether the difference in nationality, difference in region, difference in class, also being alert to differences in sexual identity and gender identity that can shape this. Some of the research which has already been done and was evaluating the sense that athletes have an impact, or a positive impact, on homophobic problems in sports, already identified that a lot of trans individuals more commonly thought that policy changes would be more important, and it was particularly gay men who responded and related to sports stars, and seeing that as more significant. So there's already been some research that's starting to identify gender and sexual identity as having a factor in those perceptions, and that's something too that we might want a candidate to consider. So
Thank
a
you,
lot
David.
of what we can do. So.
Brilliant, absolutely. I would like to, since we are on this topic, extend quite briefly, Stephen, go for it. What would your ideal candidate look like? What would you expect?
So we're very open for this position. I think ideally a social scientist, or somebody who's not afraid to talk to people, to engage with policy documents and to have conversations with policymakers in that sense. If you've got a quantitative background, or maybe more STEM background, you'd be more than welcome to apply. If you've got more of a arts and humanities or social sciences, then it wouldn't go against you. It's just really, we've given an idea of what we'd like, and including the location, there is some flexibility there. So we're open to having the discussion with the potential candidates.
Thank you, Stephen. And Andrew?
I think I said a relevant undergraduate or postgraduate qualification, which is both usefully and unusefully vague in terms of the answer. But I guess what we're saying is we don't want to rule anyone out based purely on what their previous education is. My background's physiology, and I could see it suited a physiologist. We are dealing with medicine, so any medical qualifications could be particularly relevant. But likewise, there's the carbon emission side of things, which if you've got background skill set in that, we can teach you the physiology and the medical side, so that if you knew it all, you'd ideal. We're realists, and if you knew it all, you probably wouldn't want to apply for it because you know it all already. So we'll consider everyone. So if you are interested, whatever the background, do get in touch.
Thank you, Andrew. Indeed, each of the 3 projects is very interdisciplinary. So whatever your background, get in touch or apply. We would love to hear from you. The next question came in from Edson. It goes like, how will the researchers in Africa be part of such research opportunities? For example, I am from Zimbabwe and would like to be part of this project. I think, Kirsty, would you be able to address any international applicant considerations?
Yeah, that's fine. So these opportunities are open to both home and overseas applicants. There is an expectation, however, that you would be not based in your home country. It would be based in the UK, and that you would be able to come to Hull frequently in order to undertake the research. So I'm not sure whether you're asking whether the scholarships are open to international students, in which case they absolutely are. But you can't, it would be, we don't offer distance PhD, so you would need to be in the UK, and certainly would be an expectation of you coming to Hull on certainly on a regular basis in order to undertake the PhD.
And on the scholarships themselves?
So yeah, the scholarships, and if we want to talk about the funding, the funding that we're offering comes with a home fee waiver only, which means that for international applicants, they will be, if you're successful in being awarded the scholarship, it ends up being a partial scholarship, so you need to bear that in mind. The scholarship for the fees that we will give you will not cover the full international fee. There is also a stipend that's paid annually in monthly instalments, and that's this year is £17,668. And we just want to be completely upfront in that, and want to make sure that any international applicants fully understand the financial considerations. So you will need to really look and see whether this is something you can do. We don't want anyone to get into financial hardship, so just have a really good think about that. Yeah, but there is a stipend, so to cover your living allowances. But the information should be on the website. If you do have any specific questions regarding the scholarships or the finances, then you can always contact the supervisors. They generally will then end up contacting me, and we can get the right answer to you if there's any specific question you've got around that. But the answer is the scholarships are open for both home and international applicants.
Thank you, Kirsty. And the next question is quite relevant. It comes from Joe, and the question is addressed to Dr. Eldridge. It says, as an international applicant for this PhD project, I wonder if there's a research assistant or teaching assistant job in the university in relevant areas of study to help me cover the difference between the UK fee and the international fee if my application is successful.
Yeah, I think we need to echo Kirsty's point there. You just want to make sure that you're not going to be dependent on and going into financial hardship if there wasn't options such as being able to take a research assistant or teaching assistant job. There are none that are linked specifically to this scholarship. At the moment, because of other research projects that I'm involved in, we are looking for a research assistant, or we're applying for funds to get a research assistant for a different project, which is also looking at the impact of LGBTQ grassroots participants in sports, and their experiences of barriers to inclusion, and how their experiences can help inform discussions and debates in what we might term regular sports clubs about improving their inclusivity policies. But that would be something which people would be competing for as well. So it's not something that I could offer directly to a candidate for this particular PhD. So my advice is, there are always things bubbling around at the university that you might be able to apply for, but don't pin your hopes on that, and certainly not your financial security on that.
That's a really good point. Can I just also say about the visa? As an international student, you will have restrictions on what how many hours that you're allowed to work. If you wanted to undertake some paid employment at the university, you can't. If you come over as a part-time student, you're not allowed to work, and you're not allowed to bring dependents. That's not our rules, it's the UK VI rules. If you're a full-time student and you're in receipt of a scholarship, there is a limit to how many hours a week you are able to work as part of our regulations. So as David said, don't pin your hopes on that. Think about things really carefully and do the maths on the basis that there isn't that additional work, and see if it can work for you. And then obviously if you do get additional work and it fits within the regulations and UK VI restrictions, then that's an added bonus. But as David said, don't count on that as a reason, as the way that you can make this work for you.
Thank you, Kirsty and David. Another reminder to all attendees, drop your questions in the questions box. Keep them coming. We still have a couple, but make sure you drop in more. The next question is quite an interesting one from David. It says, I am doing my master's in music. Can I apply for this PhD? Which PhD was not specified in the question. So I'm gonna address this question to all of the 3 supervisors. And I'm very curious to hear the answers.
So I read that as for David, but no, it's from David, isn't it? Yeah, but obviously, as I said, it's a very interdisciplinary project. It will be, up to you to be able to draw the connections between your existing research and practices to what our project is looking for somebody to achieve. Obviously, my colleague Catherine Baker is working on Eurovision Song Contest, so maybe you want to do a PhD with her. I think the onus is on yourself to be able to draw those connections to what we're searching for and how the skills that you're developing, and not only done in your masters but in your undergraduate or indeed in external projects that you've been involved in. If you can make the case that that this is relevant, your experience is relevant, then we certainly wouldn't just look at this and say, oh, it's an application for someone with music. We don't see the relevance. We're looking for you to demonstrate that relevance to us.
Thank you, David. Andrew, Stephen, any comments?
Go on, I'll go for this. I was thinking quite hard what the relevance of music is to my project. And like David, it's up to you to demonstrate it. The best I could come up with was the pitch of the wheeze in the asthmatics when we're inducing our asthma attacks. It's probably the closest link I could get. But no, don't rule anyone out. You have to sell yourself to us in terms of what transferable skills that you've got that would make you the ideal candidate for the project, and we'll assess that on merit. So we're not counting anyone out based on prior experience. But yeah, I'm struggling for the connection, so I'll leave that one for you to tell us.
Thanks, Andrew. Stephen, any comments?
I think David and Andrew have really covered it quite well. Of course, you're more than welcome to apply for the PhD. You can apply for all 3 PhDs, and we will just look at it and treat it as we would with another application. And the key thing will really be you making the case for the relevance to the project. And do remember, it's about, you're doing a PhD, it's for 3 years. You need to have that passion, you need to have that enjoyment of the topic. If you have that passion, it will keep you going. If you just do it because it's the first PhD you see, you might be struggling after a year or 2. So that's the key thing. If you're passionate about it, then please do apply.
Exactly. I want to echo Stephen's point on there as well. Don't just think whether you're suitable for the PhD. Do think whether the PhD project is suitable for you, because it's a big chunk of your life and it goes through ups and downs and everything, and you want to be really passionate about the subject. But yeah, make sure that in your cover letter you make the connection to any of the PhDs you want to apply for. Next question comes from Mubarak. Are this PhD scholarship open for those presently doing an MSc? And does the undergraduate background have any effect to being accepted for the scholarship? So to that, I would like to start with the fact that the successful applicant would need to start in May. So if you're doing a PhD and master's diploma now, think about the timelines. These 3 scholarships might not be the most perfect ones for you. And then I would like to jump to Kirsty if there's anything else to be added to a question on doing a master's now to start the PhD here, and whether undergraduate background has an effect.
I think you've covered it. So it's just the timings. Even when a master's finishes, even when a scholarship starts in September, doing a master's does not always dovetail in, as we know, because you often don't get results, certainly in the UK, until after the PhD finishes, which kind of doesn't tie in very well. But certainly, if these scholarships are starting in May, and I think it'd be quite hard. I don't know, I haven't done it myself, to do a master's and a PhD at the same time. I think you would probably struggle. So I think you would want to get that under your belt first. So I think probably timings don't work in your favour for these ones. And in terms of the undergraduate background, I think that just echoes the answers to the previous question. Is about you making the case for your, what you would bring to the PhD. your motivations for undertaking the projects. So I don't think it sounds to me like any of these supervisors have got the perfect candidate in mind, and they would only recruit to that ideal image. I think everyone feels very open as to backgrounds and suitability, so don't feel that would stop you from applying, but it sounds as though the timeframes probably aren't going to work in your favour for this one.
Thank you, Kirsty. The next question is from Mary, addressed to Dr. Forrest, and it goes, for this PhD about resilience, will more focus be on greenhouse gas emissions and air quality, or will it also take into account water, waste, and similar?
Well, I think it's a really good question, and in this sense, it is something that you can shape yourself as part of the PhD journey when we're outlining it at the beginning. When you're thinking about climate resilience, it's quite, or I tend to take quite a holistic perspective. So in this sense, waste, water, ecosystems, also the economic system and social elements and human capital, they would all be included within that. You can also think of it when you're thinking about net zero as also being all-encompassing, or encompassing quite a lot of other areas, including greenhouse gas emissions and, in a sense, air quality. Air quality will affect human health, which can affect people's ability to be resilient to changes. So I think there are connections there. So yes, it's up to you and in conversation with us to define the project, but there is opportunities to include them.
Thank you, Stephen. The next question is from Hasib. He's asking, he's still waiting for the final results on Masters in Energy and Environment. Can he apply? And the second question is, if any university instruction language is English, then IELTS would be required too. Kirsty, would you be able to comment on any need for Masters results and language entry requirements, please?
Yeah, so if you have actually finished your master's, so submitted, if it's a master's by thesis, for example, or if you're you've done everything on your master's, you're just waiting for results, then we can get in touch with your current university and ask for an indication of your results. I'm not sure whether all of these projects require a master's either, so that's the other thing. We don't always require them for all of our scholarships, so check with that, and the master's might be a nice to have. So I don't think it would be a problem if you finish doing all your studying for your master's. In terms of the IELTS, so proof of English language proficiency, if you go onto our website, and I will just try and pop that into the chat, so it sends you a link, you can find out about the countries that we require IELTS. So certain countries will not require IELTS, and that's where the main language is recognised as being English. With others, we do have to have proof of English language proficiency. That isn't our rule. Again, it's a UKVI rule, and that's in order for you to get your CAS and then ultimately your visa. So I can't. So generally, I'm not too sure about your individual circumstances of the country that you're from, but I will pop into the chat now where you can get more information, and it will be the same across all universities because it's a government rule. But if you do have any specific questions, then you can get in touch with us, and we can give you some information based on your individual circumstances.
Thank you, Kirsty. The next question is actually still for you. And another reminder, drop your questions. We only have 15 minutes left, so make sure you drop them in now. The next question is from Mary, and it goes, we are discussing part-time versus full-time PhD study. Would we qualify for these scholarships as a part-time student?
So all of these scholarships, I'm pretty sure, tell me if I'm wrong, supervisors, are offered on a part-time basis as well. We do that whole across most of our scholarships. So I don't think there would be an issue. If they're offered on a part-time basis, then you're more than welcome to apply for that. If you're based in the UK, then you don't have to have any concerns regarding visas. But if you're an overseas student and are interested in part-time study, then there are numerous restrictions, unfortunately, which make it not the most popular route for overseas students. So that's just something to bear in mind. And with all of this, if you're an international student, then it is really up to you to do your homework and investigation as to what kind of visa restrictions will be in place, because you know it can get quite complicated. So yes, part-time study, it's whatever is going to suit your particular circumstances.
Thank you. And the next question is part to Kirsty, part to David from Edson. The first part to Kirsty is, for international students, does the opportunity come with airfares and family support as well? If you would like to take that, and then I'll go for David for the other part.
Yeah, no, we don't offer any financial support above the home fee waiver and the stipend. So the airfares, and there's the NHS surcharge and the visas that you will need to consider, plus any other things, sort of getting yourself set up in a new country that when you first arrive. So we appreciate it is a tall order, and we understand that is you know, it is quite tough for international students, but we do want to make sure that these scholarships are open to international students as well. Yeah, just factor those costs in and try and be realistic. Having said that, we have numerous absolutely fantastic international scholars here at the University of Hull, and they add a great deal to the research and the research environment and culture at the university, doing well and really enjoying themselves. So they've made it work. So it is possible, but we understand it is an expensive business.
Maybe a tip, potentially, LinkedIn is a useful tool to go and stalk some people down and try to connect to them to ask any of the questions. So maybe you can go for it. And the second part of the question from Edson is for David. It goes, for the LGBTQ, will accessibility to the athletes be facilitated, or is it the researchers' initiatives to connect with them?
Very good question. Yeah, it's a combination of the two. But because of the connections that this research centre has to Team GB already, there's opportunities to build on that, and also you know, as part of the Olympic research network, we're hoping that will be very beneficial. So there's accessibility already. We also were contacted just yesterday by the British Association for Elite Athletes, who want to work with us on this project and support the student on that project. So certainly for UK LGBTQ athletes, we've got inroads already from that, and also organisations like Pride House, Sports LGBT Media, Outsports, other organisations are already interested in this kind of research, have expressed interest in helping support both the research of the centre and the research of the successful candidate in this. So yeah, there's a lot of networking that we can plug that the successful candidate into, they'll be responsible for the research themselves to then follow up on that and build those relationships. Obviously, as a researcher myself, I'm very keen to also sort of not piggyback on that research, but integrate myself into that research as well, as it'd be important to some of the further studies that we want to be able to do in sort of informing both the engagement of LGBTQ athletes with their sports federations and organisations, and with the International Olympic Committee as well.
Thank you, David. The next two questions are quite similar. From Osasumven, the question is, how feasible is it that someone from a Nigerian university with an education background could be eligible for the scholarship? And the second one from Imrana is, can a student from horticulture background apply for these projects? So I would like to answer generically, and then if anybody else has comments, jump in. First of all, any background, as we already covered, is more than suitable. Make sure that in the cover letter, you in the personal statement, you make the connection of how your experiences, not only your background, but any other experiences relate to the project you're applying for. And the second point, since Osasunven stated that it's from a Nigerian university, Kirsty has covered in quite a bit of detail the conditions and the difficulties of international students. So make sure you consider all of those by yourself. Anything else to add? Right. So the next question then is from Mary to Kirsty. As part of the PhD application form, we need to put in our grades. If we are from a university in the USA, they will be on a 4.0 scale. Is it okay to be listed on the 4.0 scale since it will identify us as USA applicants?
Yeah, so I'm not in the admissions team, but I'm going to give what I think is well, I know happens when you submit your application. Obviously, it's going to be really impossible for people to, if they're from overseas institutions, to translate their grades into the English grading system. So we do have a team of people who look at your application and do translate your grades into what the equivalents are for on the UK scales. And when those applications go to review, so they come in and then we would send them out to the academic colleagues for them to review, and then we'd put a note in the system to say this would be the equivalent of a 2-1, for example, or you know, an A star or A level. It's those kind of things. So yes, you need to put your grades as you have them at your home institution. If we have any questions, we will get in contact with you if you need any clarification, but we're well used to receiving transcripts and information and from all over the world, and have successfully translated them so we know what they we relate to on the UK system. So you don't need to worry about that.
Thank you, Kirsty. The next two questions come from Joe to Dr. Eldridge. First of all, you mentioned earlier that applicants should include their ideas of research methods design. I wonder how much detail I should consist of within the personal statement, as it is required to be limited to 2 pages. And additionally, also, can I send inquiries in an email to you specifically if I have any other questions?
Yeah. Very keen, Joe. That's good to see. Yeah, with the thinking about the personal statement, yeah, two pages is relatively limited. So obviously the key advice there is to be very concise in what you're doing and give kind of illustrative examples of it. You don't need to cover everything in it. You kind of want to be, what I want to be seeing is, you might suggest this is one particular focus I could take in this, and this is how my experience would help me, support me in developing and developing an approach with that particular focus. Obviously, when we have been actually, if you were successful in it, then really usually the first 6 months of working on a PhD is really a lot about just working out possible approaches, testing out possible approaches, talking about them with all 3 of the supervisors that you'll be supported with, and between us kind of thrashing out ideas that might work for you and for the kind of ambitions of the project. And obviously thinking about the ambitions of a project is going to be crucial to it as well. There are all sorts of potential impacts that this research could have, and it depends on where that research goes. So we're open to all sorts of approaches to it. So yeah, what I would suggest is you give 1 or 2 illustrative examples or particular focus points and explain why those are something you'd be very passionate about exploring. But as Agatha said, it's 3 years of work on this. You need to be passionate. You need to be able to sustain that passion for all that time, particularly for the downtimes in a PhD. They can be quite isolating experiences at times. I think definitely this one will be, because it's going to require you to work with a lot of people and hopefully a lot of really interesting people. Yeah, give us some thought about a possible angle you might take in developing and exploring this particular subject, and that should be something you could sustain over maybe a paragraph on one, a paragraph on another possible approach, and that's a good chunk of your personal statement written. Okay. In terms of emailing me specifically about other questions, yes, yeah, that's fine. I think Dr. Dontone has been put on the website as the primary point of contact for fielding inquiries about this. But you can either message John and he'll pass it on to me if he needs to, or you can email me directly about it.
Thanks, David. Very, very quickly, Andrew, Stephen, do you have any top tips you expect to see in motivational letters? Personal statements? I keep forgetting how they're called.
I think David's covered it, and what David said can be transferred along the lines. Yeah, give us an idea of the plan. I think I set out probably more specific structure in my slides than was necessary, and that's just a starting point. And if you've got other ideas, that's something that we'd discuss as a supervisory team anyway. So that was kind of our brainstorm behind the idea, but we're open. So yeah, what David said was spot on. Just give us an indication of what it is that you might want to explore with regards to the overall project idea.
Thanks. Stephen, any comments, or should we move on?
It was pretty well answered. I think the only other thing is I'm always interested in your personal motivation for doing the PhD. So what's the reason, what that pushes you, that you get up in the morning for? Why are you doing it? And that's really nice to see in a covering letter. If you can make the case of this is why I'm passionate about it, this is my personal reasons, then that would support your statement to make it stronger.
Thank you all.
Strongly.
Absolutely. The last question for now is from Hasib. I think, Kirsty, you might be able to answer it. It goes, I am married, so my wife should apply for scholarship in other subjects so that she would be with me at university. Please advise, as being married, I should apply for scholarship as I want to see my wife with me at university, or she can easily relocate on the basis of my relocation.
That's a really tricky one. So if you both you and your wife managed to get a scholarship, happy days, that's wonderful. That brilliant. If you apply for your scholarship and you're successful, and you will need to get some really good visa advice about who is allowed to come with you and what kind of visas you need. Obviously, getting a scholarship is really competitive, and it is no guarantees that that your wife would get a scholarship if you manage to get one, and vice versa. So I think you probably should just apply for the things that you want to apply for, see if you're successful, and then look into the visa situation. We've also got a team at the University of Hull, and I'll pop their email address in the chat, and they can give you very specific, in-depth visa advice. I can't give visa advice, and I certainly at the moment it's a hypothetical situation, but once you know your situation for sure, then you can speak to us and get some visa advice. So when it comes to your actual arrival in the UK, then you will make sure that you're on the right visa. But in terms of dependencies or those kind of things, I can't give that kind of advice. So hopefully it will work out for you and you both get a scholarship. That would be amazing. At the same university, I should imagine it would be lovely to see your wife for the next 3 years. Yeah, just apply for the scholarship and then get the visa advice based on your circumstances at the time.
Thank you, Kirsty. And I see Maria dropped it into the chat, the link of the Hull University website on international visas and immigration. So thank you all for attending this workshop. We're perfectly on time. I believe it has been recorded, so the recording should be up and online if you joined late, or if you know anybody else who might be interested in applying for any of these scholarships, make sure you send the recording far and wide. And yeah, looking forward to seeing your applications and sifting through them and inviting you to the interview and hopefully seeing you take on each of these fellowships. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.